Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Jamango Academy. Time is really flying away from us, so in today's video, we'll be making a speedrun timer for our obby course. This will teach us the basics of how to create and update UI and text in Jamango, and also encourages some crazy parkour speedrun strats. The timer will start when we approach the first jump in our obby, and it'll stop when we reach the finish line. So let's not waste any more time. I've made a script here called timer.ts, and I've imported it through server.ts and client.ts. In this script, we'll set up a function to create our UI, or user interface. This is what we call initializing our UI. So I'll write export function init UI, with export telling Jamango that this can be accessed from other scripts, that it's a function, and calling it init UI is so we can understand what it's doing. Next, we'll use one of Jamango's special features, which is j.uielement.innerHTML. Now, if you've done some programming before, you might have heard of the HTML language, but the focus of this series isn't on this language, and it's a little bit complicated, so we have some code in the video description for you that you can copy and paste over into your script. Next, I want to create a text variable on our UI, and this is what will be displaying our timer. To do that, I'll make a new HTML element above our init UI function. I'll write export, let timer text is the name of our text variable, and we'll make it a HTML element. Then when we initialize our UI, we'll make sure that the timer text variable is also set up correctly here. So I'll write timer text equals j.uielement.querySelector, and then in brackets and quotation marks, .timer. Writing the .timer here at the end is kind of like a key that we can use to access this timer text variable later on in our script. And like I said, this timer text variable is going to display the speedrun time for each player. To begin this process, we need to first define a few variables in order to control our timer. The first will be start time, so I'll write let start time equals 0. And then underneath this, I'll use a boolean variable to check whether the timer has started or not. So I'll write let timer running equals false. This is because when we load up our game for the first time, we don't want the timer to be running, but only when the player approaches the first jump. Great, so now we have these variables to control our timer, so let's make another few functions to start and stop our timer. And if you're a bit unsure about what functions are, they're essentially reusable code blocks. So later on in this video, you'll see how we get a different script to say to this one, hey, I want to start a timer, so run the start timer function. So on that note, let's make the start timer function. I'll write export so that it can be accessed by other scripts, function start timer. In this function, we'll write start time equals j.getWorldTime. j.getWorldTime gets the current time that the game has been running, so this allows players to start the obby course at different times, but still have an accurate timer for each of them. Then underneath that, let's make sure that our script knows that the timer is running, so I'll set the timer running variable to true. Now for the stop timer function, this is really easy. I'll just write export function stop timer, almost identical to what we had before, and here I'll just set the timer running variable to false, so that our timer won't count up anymore when our timer stops. Alright, so quick recap. We've created our UI and text object to display the timer, and we've also set up our variables to control when the timer is running or not. We also have these functions to help us start and stop the timer when we get to it. The final piece for this script is actually calculating the time to display in the text. To do this, we need to check the time and update the text every tick of our game. So I'll write a new code section with j.onGameTick, and then I'll put in a brackets and an underscore, and then the world's current time. Again, using the world's current time is important because our start time is also using the world time, so this keeps everything in order. I'll make a new constant called elapsed time, describing how much time has passed since we've started up our game up until the current world time. For that calculation, I'll let elapsed time equal current time take start time. So now elapsed time holds the player's time spent in the obby. But we want to display the time to the player in the formats of minutes and seconds. This means that we'll take the elapsed time variable and calculate how many minutes and leftover seconds there are in it. So I'll make a new constant called minutes, and this will equal math.floor, and then in brackets, elapsed time divided by 60. Let's break this down step by step. Math.floor takes in a decimal value and it rounds it down to the closest minute. So if we've spent 90 elapsed seconds in our game, that's 1.5 minutes, so it'll round it down to 1. The divided by 60 here just helps us to get the number of the whole minutes, and math.floor rounds that down to a whole number. Next, we want to do something similar for seconds as well. I'll write const seconds equals math.floor, and then in brackets, elapsed time %60. The percent sign here is what we call the modulus, and this calculates the leftover seconds we have from the elapsed time. So again, if we've spent 90 elapsed seconds, 1 minute will go into our minutes constant, and then the remaining 30 seconds will go into our seconds constant. Together, we combine minutes and seconds to display our text in-game. To do this, we'll make yet another constant to combine these. I'll call it formatted time, and then we have to use some coding syntax here to format it correctly for our game. In between backdashes here, I'll put a $sign, curly bracket, and then minutes. I'll separate that with a colon, and then another set of curly brackets, seconds, and then we format it using .toString. The reason we do this is because seconds is just a number, but we want to use it as a string data type, a string just being a set of characters. After toString, I'll write pad start 2 and then in quotation marks 0. The reason for this is to add some padding at the start of the seconds, so if you had a timer that was say 3 seconds long, it'll make it say 03 instead of just 3. So now that we have the text that we want to display stored in formatted time, we can update our timer text variable with this text. We can simply access that text by writing timertext.innerText and make it equal to $, curly brackets, formatted time, making sure that we surround this using backdashes and not quotation marks. I've also put a clock emoji here so that people understand that this is our timer. Okay, now we have our j.onGameTick that runs every frame of our game and calculates the time that should be displayed in our text. Now we gotta make this timer start at the right time. From previous episodes, you'll recall that we have made this checkpoint system, and the first checkpoint in our game is at the start of our obby. This first checkpoint has a checkpoint ID of 0 in its checkpoint trait in the respawn.ts script. In this respawn script, I want to access our timer.ts script, so that means I'll need to import it. So just under the first import line at the top of our script, I'll write import asterisk as timer from ./timer. Just like how we use jdot to access the main Jamango specific functions in coding, we can now use timer.dot to access the functions of our timer script. Next, we want to initialize and start our timer whenever we pass this first checkpoint, the one with a checkpoint ID of 0. So in the collision code, which activates when the player collides with checkpoint box areas, I'll make a new if statement to check whether the checkpoint ID of the checkpoint is 0. If it is equal to 0, we'll run the functions in our UI script. So that's timer.initUI and then timer.startTimer to load up our UI and then get our timer started. Now we have our timer starting, but we of course have to stop it when the player gets to the end of the obby. To do that, head to the final checkpoint in your game and see what ID number it has. In this case, I'll just say mine is 4. Then we can write another if statement in our respawn.ts script whenever the player collides with this final checkpoint. And I'll call this stop timer function here as well with timer.stopTimer. And if we look at what the stop timer function does, it's simply setting the timer running boolean to false, which is great, but we're not actually using this variable to stop the timer from running. So what we can do is head over to our j.onGameTick function where it's updating the text. And before we calculate all of these numbers to display them to our player, I'll use another if statement to check whether timer running is false or not. So I'll write if timer running equals false, return. What return does is that it's telling our script that if timer running is false, we'll stop running the rest of the code for this tick of the game. So none of the following code will run, which stops the timer from being updated with new numbers, and now when we get to the end of the obby, the final time will be displayed instead of continuing to count upwards. And that, my friends, is what we call a very heavy programming episode. But now it's time to show our code in action. So I'm at the start of my obby, and as I walk through the first checkpoint, we see our timer UI appearing on our screens. Now I can continue jumping through the obby, and maybe with a quick hack or two, I'll fly over to the finish line to test that our timer stops correctly as well. And as I pass through our finish line, our timer stops in place, exactly what we're looking for. So now with the speedrun timer, you and your friends can have some true competition in your Jamango obby game. If you get a good run, be sure to record it or take a screenshot and share it in our Discord server. Also feel free to post progress updates or ask questions here, but for now, well done on completing this video, and I'll see you in the next one.